co-hosting this event with the Vocal Seniority. This is the fourth in our series of the Bend 2020 What's at Stake series. And we have our 4 progressive city council candidates. Thank you all for joining us. We have Anthony Broadman, Megan Perkins, Melanie Kebler, and Schenkelberg. And then we also have as our subject matter expert and our moderator, we're lucky to have Lindsey Hardy with us of the Environmental Center. She's the program director of the Energy Challenge, and she was also part of the Climate Action Steering Committee that got the Bend climate work started here, and that's what we're here to talk about. So I'll just go over real quickly how we're going to proceed tonight. It's going to be similar to how we have the format of our previous roundtables. So we'll start out with a quick welcome and introduction by Lindsey. We'll also have a 2-minute introduction by each of the candidates, and then we will go into a Q&A session where the candidates will each have a chance to answer 5 separate questions. Lindsey is going to be moderating this. After the 5 preset questions, we'll open this up for our audience to ask a question. And so there may be room for about 2 to 3 questions at the end, depending on how much time it takes to answer the first 5 questions. And then each of the candidates will have the opportunity to provide a closing statement, and Sid will come and provide us a brief closing statement. So thank you, everybody, and I'll hand it off to Lindsey. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I am excited to be here tonight in the presence of so many amazing city council candidates who I am really excited to be supporting and working with here in Bend. As Nancy mentioned, I was involved with the Climate Action Steering Committee that helped to gather community input and support for the Climate Action Plan and bring a plan before City Council that got passed last fall, in the fall of 2019. But I just wanted to really quickly take a step back from there and just give a little insight on what happened before that process. The City Council adopted a climate resolution in 2017, and the reason that passed and came before City Council was that there was a group of citizens and local organizations who were really passionate about getting legislation and policy passed around climate change. So I think there's just a really important story to be told there, that when the community comes together and really cares about an issue and brings that to City Council, a lot can happen if they're allowed to have a voice at City Council. So I think that's a word of encouragement during these times, that we should still be continuing to bring issues to City Council, and hopefully they will let us all be heard on some of these really important issues. So the Climate Action Plan is a plan to reach our goals of seeing a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions here in Bend by 2030 and a 70% reduction by 2050. This is a really exciting time to be looking at climate action. That might not even be the right word. This is a really pivotal time to be looking at this, because I think we're seeing firsthand right now what's at stake with climate action and how this can affect communities across the state, across the country, and across the globe. So I think Bend is maybe not at the forefront. We have the potential to be at the forefront of this issue if our community continues to push on these issues, and if our City Council continues to drive these initiatives forward as issues that are important for the community. So we have a few questions here for the City Council candidates today to learn a little bit more about the Climate Action Plan and what this work might look like going forward as we work to implement this plan. So the plan that's laid out has 4 key focus areas around energy supply, energy in buildings, transportation, and waste and materials. And each of these initiatives, some of them the city will lead on, some the community will lead on, and some are going to be a joint and collaborative effort. Regardless, City Council is going to have to continue to support this plan to get it implemented, and so it'll be important to have support from potential candidates. So we have a few questions here today to see how we can continue to implement this work here in Bend. Actually, first though, we would like to do the candidate introductions. Is that correct, Nancy? All right. So why don't we start with Melanie? Each candidate is going to introduce themselves, and then we will jump into those questions and then open it up to questions from the community.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Kebler. I'm running for position 1 on the Bend City Council. And I'm running because I love Bend as a city, and I want everyone here to share in our prosperity as we grow. And part of what I am pretty passionate about going forward, and hopefully we'll get to implement as a city councilor, is taking on the climate crisis, is conserving and protecting our natural environment here in Bend. It really just makes sense that Bend should be a leader on the fight against climate change. We have an incredible natural resource here in our city, and it's really crucial to the health of our community, the sustainability of our city, and our local economy, that we preserve and protect the natural resources we have here. So I'm really excited for this discussion tonight. I'm really proud of the work of the community to push forward and to get to this place where we have a community climate action plan that I can look at and say, I want to implement that. And I'm hoping to talk some more about what that's going to look like and where we could go further, where other ideas might come up in the next few years with a new council, hopefully of the folks you see here today. So thanks for having me, and I'm excited to get started.
Thank you, Melanie. Let's jump to Megan next.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan Perkins, and I am running for Bend City Council position 3. I am running on a platform of inclusion, access, and economic equity. And I'm really excited to talk tonight a lot about how equity and climate lenses, can be implemented as we go forward with our city council and as we go forward with the climate action plan. I'm also really excited tonight to talk a little bit more about ideas for, really getting this plan implemented piece by piece, and how we can make sure that the Environment and Climate Committee can be a robust committee and a successful committee. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Melanie. Rita?
Hi, my name is Rita Schenkelberg. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them, and I'm running for Bend City Council position 4. A lot of my platform has been talking about equity and how do we bring equity to the council and to leadership in Bend. It's incredibly important that we have diverse voices at the table and they're able to share their experiences and really share what their lived experience here is in Bend. So as a queer person of color, I bring that perspective. In addition to that, learning a lot about environmental justice as I've been running this campaign. And one of the pieces that I'm super interested in was the goal that Lindsay mentioned in her introduction, that decrease in carbon emissions. What was it, like 30% by 2030? Is that wrong? Or 40? I think it was 40%. There we go. Everyone's nodding. And so that decrease in carbon emissions is something I'm really passionate about, because if you think about Bend and how big it is, we really could, create accessibility with transit, with biking, and with walking. So that those transportation options is something I'm pretty passionate about on my platform. And the other piece, as Megan already mentioned, is that climate committee, really bringing the community's voices to the table and really hearing their perspective. Hopefully as a Bend City Councilor, I'll see it from kind of a bird's eye view. And so community members who are living it from day to day, really having them have a place to share their experience. So I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Rita. Let's wrap up with Anthony's introduction.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you to Indivisible and to Vocal Seniority for putting this on and providing this platform. My name is Anthony Broadman. I'm running for Bend City Council position 2. It's currently held by Councilor Mosley. I'm really excited for this event tonight, and I think before we went live, I said tonight we could just really point at the sky to illustrate how important this issue is. It's obviously much more important than just the smoke today and yesterday, but this is such a clear and present danger to our country and our city and our community, and particularly communities that are already suffering. The climate crisis is not on the horizon. It's obviously it's here right now. I'm running for city council because we need a safe, connected transportation network, and we need affordable housing in the interior of Bend. And both of those things are inextricably intertwined with the climate crisis. I'm very excited about the climate action plan, but I also see it as a component of our obligation to address the climate crisis, along with the city planning components like a progressive transportation system and affordable, complete neighborhoods where people can live sustainably. So thank you again to everybody. I'm really excited to hear everybody's views, and again, thank you for hosting this.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, our first question for our candidates today. What pieces of the community action plan do you think will be the most impactful in achieving the city's climate action goals? And I'd like to start with Megan for this question.
Well, there's a lot that excites me and I think will be impactful. I think the most important thing, and you sort of mentioned it, Lindsay, was the process by which this plan came through and was adopted. The fact that it was a process that acknowledged, the importance of equity and people that are disproportionately affected by our climate. Also, that the plan looking forward involves not only just the city government, but individuals, businesses. It really encapsulates everybody. And I think that's really important and is going to be the most impactful piece of it. Because if we just took one sector of our city and said, okay, now you're going to do this. Unless we all change our behavior, we're not going to make the goals that we really, wanted to set with the 40% by 2030, and also the 100% renewable energy, which I think is the goal for that was 2025. So to me, those are sort of the things that are going to be most impactful. I also think that with the rapid growth of Bend, I really like the section of it that talks about how we can try to reuse and recycle more, construction and demolition materials. So, I think that's something that, partnering with the building industry too will have a huge impact on our climate goals.
Thanks, Megan. Let's have Rita up next.
Thanks, Lindsay. Very similar to a lot of the things that Megan said, but just a couple of things I'd like to add is just really having as the transportation bond is going to be on the ballot, it's really going to bring the conversation about transportation to the forefront. So I think that is a huge part of the CCAP. Just continuing to talk about the many transportation options that Bend has, and that's also part of my platform. It really talks about the connectivity, the walking, the sidewalks, the biking, bike lanes, all of those pieces that are really going to increase the safety, and then really, as I said earlier, increase the accessibility of many different residents in Bend being able to use different modes of transportation. Also the conversation about electric vehicles and how we can utilize those and create accessibility for people to get electric vehicles and then be able to use them in town, having more charging stations, and then bringing that mindfulness that I think is really necessary to trips, how we're really going to use carpooling post-pandemic, and then how we can work together as a community. I like that the CCAP has that piece of the community. And so not only is it a plan that many humans created together, but it's also bringing the community in and continuing to have those conversations.
Thank you, Rita. Let's have Anthony next.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think the components of the plan that are potentially most impactful are, the macro goals of decarbonizing our energy supply and obviously making buildings more efficient. But like I said at the outset, I do look at this climate action plan as just one piece from a city planning perspective. And in particular, when we look at transportation and housing, if we're widening roads or creating more induced demand and growing vehicle miles traveled, or if we're allowing inefficient, disconnected, incomplete neighborhoods, we are, we are not doing ourselves any favors. And the climate action plan can't fix bad city planning. So my hope and my goal would be, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, would be to have the climate action plan be one component of a sort of bigger bundle of sticks that can really help us be the most sustainable city we can be. Are we going to grow sustainably? Are we going to grow intentionally and intelligently in a way that is consistent with our environmental values, or are we going to allow growth to overwhelm our housing and our transportation system? I hope it's the former. So that's my hope for the CCAP.
Thank you, Anthony. Okay, let's hear from Melanie to wrap up this first question.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest impacts of having this plan in place is we have started this conversation, and it is a serious, well thought out plan worked on by a lot of people in our community that says we can do something. We've started the conversation of saying we can do something as a city, as Bend, Oregon. We can do something about our impact on the climate. So I think that's great. And I think people have touched on the different areas. I agree, getting off of fossil fuels, anything that we can do to impact that is going to be major. And that kind of trickles down into our transportation system, into our land use system. I think there's a lot of cool creative ideas in there, and just stuff that people need to start talking about, like recycling construction debris, or like building with low carbon cement to start with, right? Like, how are we building our city in a way that actual buildings themselves don't require as much energy and are more sustainable? Can we look at putting solar on buildings and all those kind of things? These are all good ideas that are in this plan that I think are going to make a big impact, because we know when you look around, construction is still happening. Buildings are still being built right now in Bend, and that's, I think, going to continue. The other thing I'm glad that this CCAP calls out is sort of the land use side of it, where we're talking about what types of home are we building, where are we building them, and as Anthony talked about, this plan needs to kind of filter into a lot of other decision points that the city makes about planning and where we put neighborhoods and what do those neighborhoods look like. And are we going to be sprawling out, or are we going to try to be a little more dense and build where we can in our urban growth boundary to try to lessen that effect on the environment and, key into some of these ideas about transportation and reducing our carbon impact. So I think the plan has a lot of really great impact points. And I'm just glad that we have it so that we have a place to start moving forward on this really critical issue.
Thank you all. Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, I almost feel like that one is a trick question, because I'm like, well, for me, they're all important. But it was really interesting and inspiring to see the connections that you all made between some of these systemic pieces and how this can be integrated with all of these other really big picture things that we're talking about right now, from how we develop, what kind of concrete we use, and how we build new buildings. So thank you all for making some great connections to the plan and how you would utilize this moving forward. Our next question, what do you see as the role for the Environment and Climate Committee? This is the committee that will be overseeing the implementation of the CCAP, as well as reviewing any kind of sustainability associated initiatives that come before the city. So what do you see the role of the Environment and Climate Committee and how do you see its influence on the decisions of City Council? Let's start with Anthony for this question.
Thanks, Lindsay. From my perspective, I'm really excited to see the formation of this committee because I think that it can serve as the climate conscience of our city and also help us understand what types of criticism we as a city government and citizens of city are going to hear from the community at large regarding the measures that we know we need to take. I'll be honest, I'm always somewhat suspicious of new committees because if committees fixed everything, Portland would be perfect. A lot of cities have a lot of committees, but I do think what I'm inspired by, I will say, is that raising climate to the committee level, I think sends a message, signals the seriousness with which we have to take the climate crisis. And I really hope that the climate committee will push the envelope and give the city council a menu of options that will help us meet the challenges ahead of us. I hope that it is an aggressive conscience of our city when it comes to the climate.
Thank you, Anthony. Let's go to Rita next.
Thanks, Lindsay. You cut out. Well, I think it was my internet, but I'm here now. So what do I think the role of the Environment and Climate Committee is? Kind of what I said in my intro, just really bringing many different voices to the table. Bend is a really amazing place, and there's a lot of leaders in the community that have a lot of focus on environmentally conscious decision making. And so hoping that a bunch of those leaders make it onto the committee with a mix of people who are just living day to day. And so really they can have pretty in-depth conversations because as a city councilor, we have that bird's eye view. And so having this committee to really have the in-depth conversations and then bring their expertise to city council and really share their perspectives. And then if they don't agree on stuff, then we have multiple perspectives that we can kind of filter through as city council. It's really exciting because we'll see it from one perspective and then they'll be like living it day to day. And so talking to them about those pieces, I think it's also just a really concrete way that we can continue to move the CCAP forward, in pretty trying times with COVID. It'd be kind of, sometimes things kind of fall to the wayside. And so with us continuing to move forward with the formation of this committee, it shows that climate action and environmentally conscious choices is still at the forefront of Ben's mind, and we need to keep it there instead of it falling to the wayside.
Thank you, Rita. Let's go with Melanie next.
Thanks. So I think the establishment of a committee that is going to advise our council on these issues does send a really strong message about the city's sort of attitude towards climate change. It's here, it's real, it's a serious issue that our city is facing and that we need to do something about. And we want to have a community group that's representative, as people have mentioned, to help guide us through implementing this. And when we run into roadblocks, when we run into things that don't work, they can help us to figure that out. When we run into programs that are very successful, hopefully we can build on those. And this committee, I would like to see work as a body that's really helping us apply this climate lens to city decision making. And yes, implementing the CCAP, but I'm hoping that they will also be able to take on other issues as the city council, says this is something that maybe we need an environmental lens on, or we need to take on this project that we want to start, and we can get, advice from that committee about that. And I do want to also mention that I think that this committee and most of the committees of the city should be working to make sure that the barriers are as low as possible for resident involvement. So we do get that different diversity of voices on this committee. And I agree that we have so many great organizations in this area that really value our natural environment and are working to conserve it. But yeah, I think having some sort of, quote, everyday people that maybe aren't super environmental warriors, but do care about the climate change problem and want to help the city get through that, be on this committee, I think will be great. And of course, I think we're going to get into later, but having people from our communities of color as well on this committee is going to be really crucial to make sure that we're also applying that equity lens on our decision making on the CCAP.
Thank you, Melanie. Let's wrap up with Megan for this question.
All right. I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. Yeah, I mean, particularly, I think that the key role of this committee will be to really sort of tap us on the shoulder, right, as city councilors, and sort of keep us, using, like Melanie said, that climate lens, right, when we're talking about, housing, the economy, transportation. I also, hope that this, committee, again, I'll repeat, is a robust committee, and that it really focuses on building partnerships, because I think that the only way that this is really going to work as a city is if we, partner with all sorts of not only government entities, but businesses and community groups. And I also think it's really important that they provide input during, the council's budgeting process and goal setting process, so that, this plan doesn't get sort of tossed to the side. I also am really hoping and looking forward to that they have youth input on this committee, because they are inheriting this earth. And I hope that the plans, focus on needing more sort of equitable representation will actually come to fruition when the committee members are announced.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, that was one of the parts that I was most excited to see about the Climate Action Steering Committee, to have some youth voices there. And I think there were definitely voices that were missing at that table. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with this new committee to bring more people and to just reevaluate what that table looks like and who we are seeking input from. All right, so our third question, where do you see the most resistance to the climate goals, and how can this be addressed? All right, and let's start with Rita for this question, please.
Yeah, I think that there could be a lot of resistance. There's a lot happening in the world right now, and so there's a lot of different focal points, and it's incredibly important that we continue to have the conversation. And I feel this way about many different actions that are happening right now, just because we maybe feel like there's a lot of pressure right now. Climate change isn't going to go anywhere, as we all kind of saw yesterday, that it's basically right in front of our faces. And so it's about continuing to have the conversation, and it's really about making that conversation accessible and that we're not kind of pushing it away. I think that it's also, when I'm talking about the accessibility piece, it's also through like an economic lens too, that there are a lot of like environmentally conscious choices we can make that are going to be sustainable and aren't going to cost a whole lot of money. And so are we making those choices available to all humans, or are we just kind of like pushing them to the side? I know that there's many organizations here in Bend that educate a lot, and so educate through an environmentally conscious lens. And so is that education widespread? Is that education palatable for all humans? And are we able to have constructive conversations where people might disagree, and then we're able to bring education into the room? Instead of like, it's supposed to be this way, or it's supposed to be this way, that we're able to kind of like look at the facts and look at something that's going to impact the youth in 5 years or in 10 years or then in 20 years. I know there's been a couple of different organizations that have looked at it from that perspective. And then also in Bend, it's just the equity piece. There's a lot of resources in this town, and if you're able to have if you're able to have an electrical vehicle, have an electric vehicle. If you're able to do this or that to support environmentally conscious decisions, continuing to encourage people to do that, and then creating as much accessibility for people that might not have access to those resources.
Thank you, Rita. Let's hear from Melanie next, please.
Well, I think what's been really hard about the climate crisis is that it's just sort of a fundamental human thing that change is hard. Change in your personal habits, change from day to day, change in the place that you live, that maybe you've been here for a while and you see it changing. People are resistant to change. And so I think that part of implementing this plan on the individual level is that education piece, is making it easy for people to develop the habit of making environmentally conscious decisions every day, and making it easy and safe for people to change habits that we know are destructive to our climate. And we have, another area where there is resistance that I've seen is when we talk about getting people out of their cars, when we talk about moving away from being a city that your first choice is driving above all else. People are resistant to that because that's how we've built this nation for decades now, is around the car. And we need to go a different direction. And it's hard for people to wrap their brains around that. And I think we need to start talking about the way that getting people out of their cars and building the infrastructure so people can feel safe in other modes for people that still have to drive or choose to drive, that makes the system better for them too. Because we're removing cars from the equation and having more people on bikes or walking or rolling, that's going to be a better experience for you if you are driving. Just things like that, just changing the way that people are thinking about some of these both systemic and individual changes is what we're going to need to do. And I think, as Megan mentioned, I think there's an incredible youth movement here in the city that's ready to help support that and lead the way and show an example of what those kind of environmentally conscious everyday decisions can look like.
Thanks, Melanie. Megan, you are up next.
I see there being a lot of resistance, particularly during, a pandemic, right? Like Melanie said, change is hard. I think the first thing that, we need to do to address it is get a progressive council in there who actually believes in science and believes in climate change and believes that this is something that we need to prioritize. Secondly, I think that, Bend has so much growth, right? And I think that we could see this growth as sort of like an opportunity to really show a vision of Bend, as a city that can grow responsibly and sustainably, and we can sort of link our location, at the center of so many, beautiful natural resources with the economic benefits to sustainable, conservation. We need to, we almost need like a PR campaign, right? We need to sell that because this plan is voluntary. So we need to sell it to the community, and we need to do that through education. We need to partner. We need to partner with the builders and the chamber and Parks and Rec and the schools. And we really need to work on setting a vision together. We need to make the case that, a lot of these things like solar panels and all these transitions that will need to happen, are perhaps initially not cheap, but will end up actually saving the city a lot of money in the long run. And so I think focusing also on the long-term economic benefits of this plan.
Thanks, Megan. Anthony.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think it's good to go forth on these questions because I tend to agree with what everybody has said. And I do feel like we're at a tipping point in this community, or at least I hope we are. Maybe I'm naive, but I think no matter what industry you're in, again, you just have to look at the sky. I hope another silver lining of this public health disaster of COVID-19 has shown us the need to act collectively to prevent these macro disasters like COVID-19, like the climate crisis, from bringing our public health system, our economy, our society to basically a standstill. I mean, if we think COVID-19 was destructive, I think it's just a preview of the kinds of challenges we're going to have with the climate crisis if we don't act aggressively, and possibly even if we do. So I would like to find interest convergence with industry to the extent we're able. So if you're in the timber industry and our fires are getting hotter and faster every year, it may benefit you to lend your support to measures that will slow down the rate of climate change. If you're in the tourism or the home building sector, and we can't breathe in Bend because of the smoke, you're not going to do as well. So again, I would like to look for interest convergence where possible, and I think we can learn from COVID. People may have a better handle on high momentum trends or time lag trends after COVID. Maybe it will be, I hope, it will be easier for people to see and grasp what we need to do with climate change.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, so we have our fourth question here coming up. When thinking about Bend's path to achieving the goals of the CCAP, what examples do you look at for inspiration, and what do you think we can accomplish here in Bend? I'd like to start with Melanie for this question.
Sure. I think there are a lot of other cities that are taking on this work. I know there are cities, Eugene and Portland here in Oregon, that are taking on climate initiatives and setting goals that are strong and bold to work towards. And I'd like to see us in that arena, when we're doing our next biennium of goal setting in 2021, setting some really strong goals around climate and showing that we're making a priority. On kind of the project level, I think there's some interesting stuff that I've seen out of cities like Minneapolis, where they have a really a cool tree program, which I'm sure a lot of cities have, that basically helps people get more trees planted in the city, increases the urban tree canopy, which is a great thing to do for our climate. And that they also have ended making any new drive-throughs in their city. So as a piece of that, getting away from car culture and making the city more walkable and making other modes of transportation more safe. That was a really cool idea that they just said, well, we're not going to build any more drive-throughs. We'll have to have another way to get your burger. You can go inside and grab it, or you can pick it up outside, as all of us are doing these days with COVID. And then another interesting thing that's hopefully maybe coming is, I know the city of Edmonton in Canada has eliminated all parking minimums for buildings that are going up. And parking minimums are the requirement that you have to build X amount of parking spaces when you're building housing. And what those do is they make projects more expensive, and they take away space on the lot for you to build housing, especially the dense kind of mixed use housing that I think a lot of us would like to see to help combat climate change. So I think that's also a very interesting policy that I want to look at here. Where can we eliminate or reduce as much as possible some of these barriers to getting the type of housing we built and the type of land use schemes that we want, that all connects back to our stance on fighting the climate change crisis. So those are just some ideas I've seen from other cities. There's examples out there that we can use to help kind of get to the forefront of this fight.
Thank you, Melanie. I have, let's see, Anthony up next.
Thank you. I think the best way to meet our climate goals is to do what we know we need to do for non-climate reasons, and that is to ensure that we have a safe, connected transportation system that gives people options for getting around our city. The fact that we're still talking about ensuring there's a safe connection east-west on Franklin and Greenwood, and a connection at Reed Market is Exhibit A in our, or A, B, and C in our inadequate transportation system. I think we have the opportunity to make Bend the most walkable, bikeable, busable, and drivable city. And if we do that, it's going to be both obviously a great place to live, and we're fulfilling our obligation to confront the climate crisis. We also need affordable, complete neighborhoods so that people can do all the things that make this an exceptional city, grow their families, get to work, go to school and shopping, and grow their businesses in ways that don't expand our carbon footprint. So with transportation, the places that I look to are, because often, weather is used as an excuse why we don't have an effective, sustainable, progressive transportation system. And I look at places like Fort Collins and Chicago and Minneapolis, and other snowy places, or roughly the same amount of snow, where different modes of transportation options for drivers and people who ride the bus and people who bike and walk aren't seen as, a benefit for one particular type of user. They're just seen as, one component of keeping the city moving efficiently. So a true low stress network with meaningful buffers for users that would allow kids to get to school and from school and to parks safely, I think is a tangible, important way of confronting the climate crisis, along with Vision Zero and making sure that our modes of transportation are safe. So I think that's, in addition to the specific goals within the plan, the concrete things we can do from a city planning perspective.
Thank you, Anthony. Let's wrap up this question hearing from Rita.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I grew up in Denver, and so I've seen city sprawl. And so when I moved to Bend, like initially I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like there's actual access to the outdoors that we can drive to versus the sprawl where the city starts. So far before you get to the actual city. And so initially I still see Bend as an inspiration because of how, with the urban growth boundary, we've really created this integration. And also just looking at the accessibility that we've kind of already created. Some of the other pieces that I think too around inspiration is really thinking about how do we increase transit, how do we create safety, and then just the whole conversation about it being a community effort, that we can kind of all work together to make Bend the place that we want to live. I think there are many humans that are very willing to do the work, and so how do we give them the tools and the resources to really make that happen? It also really connects with the affordable housing piece, making sustainable, affordable housing, making environmentally conscious decisions with that, and all of those pieces and all of those learnings that I've kind of attached to and learned from have really inspired me to how we can continue to move Bend forward.
Thank you, Rita. And I just realized that I skipped Megan on this question. So Megan, I would love to hear your response for it.
Rita said it so well, though. Yeah, I mean, I think that, in terms of inspiration, we just need to look at where we are, right? That should be our inspiration. We don't need to sort of compare ourselves or look for any other reason anywhere else. I mean, we live in an outdoor utopia. We have access to mountains and rivers and lakes and trees and forests and, recreation areas and parks. And, that's why so many of us moved here. And so I think that should be our vision, right? And we need to understand that we can't take that for granted, and so we need to, be inspired by our outdoor areas and this beautiful place that we live in, and be concerned about things like flows on the Deschutes and wildfires and our, and car emissions, that affect our quality of air. So I think that's to me is the inspiration for all of this, and that's the vision that we need to show as leaders in the community. Also, like Anthony said, it's really important to continue creating, complete neighborhoods, and they shouldn't just be complete neighborhoods in Northwest Crossing. They should be affordable. I think, the BCD is a good inspiration for our community. We need areas where you can work and play and shop and eat and sleep. You do less driving, there's less emissions, more time spent on a bike or walking. Ben should be looking at that model of housing and that type of neighborhood, and really focusing on growing up and invigorating our existing neighborhoods and not growing out.
Thank you, Megan. So just a reminder to everybody who's joining us here on Zoom or on Facebook, if you have any additional questions for the candidates, we have one last question that we will go around and have everybody answer. But if you have some more, please send them in, chat them on Facebook or here in the chat on Zoom. So our final question for the candidates, Where do you see an opportunity for an equity lens in this work? How would you make the case that equity and climate are intersectional to your community and fellow counselors? And Megan, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but, I think, just like we want to apply an equity lens to everything, housing, transportation, the economy, everything, we need to understand that it's important that we also have a climate lens for everything that we're doing as well. I think the most important thing is to always really be aware of sort of who's not in the room, who is not being asked, who's not being brought to the table, and who, most importantly, is disproportionately affected by by climate, and let's look at where are the trees, where are the parks, where are the houses, where are the bus stops, where are the bike paths, where are the greenways, and make sure that as a community we are not just affecting one area of our community, but we're spreading it throughout the community so that we all can benefit from these things. I think the committee has an important role to play, will have an important role to play in that, and I think that we also sort of need to understand that environmentally friendly solutions like let's say sustainable housing, they not only address economic disparities, but they also address environmental sustainability and health as well. And so I think that's sort of as leaders on the city council, I think that is what we need to get out there to the community, right?
Thanks, Megan. Anthony, you are up next.
Thanks. Well, just like COVID-19, the climate crisis discriminates. We've certainly seen this in tribal communities where treaty fisheries are disproportionately impacted, where fires have disproportionately impacted treaty resources, federally managed forestry. Coastal peoples have lost land from erosion and flooding. So, and also just the poorest communities just have by definition less of a safety net. So fires, weirder, more severe weather, flooding, drought, these tangible results of the climate crisis actually affect folks who are already struggling, more profoundly. I hope we can take the same lesson from COVID, that ignoring the early calls for action from the scientific community ends up being costlier in the long run, even if these measures might seem onerous at the start. So, I would agree with Megan. We have to use equity as a country, as a city, as a lens through which we look at everything. Or because if we don't, then we're affecting communities in need disproportionately, and that to me is not only unjust, but not who we are as a city or a country.
Thank you, Anthony. Let's see, Rita, you are up next.
Thanks, Lindsay. I truly think that an equity lens should be brought to everything. So this seems, very intuitive for me. It's all intersectional. When you're looking at equity, you're really looking at, equity and intersectionality with environmental justice and BIPOC community members. You're really looking at are people's basic needs being met? And the reality is no. And so continuing to have that conversation about how we can make that happen. And how I really feel that intersectionality is working out is how so many different parts of our town look so different. How there's a huge rental community and the lack of support that they receive. How there's been conversations around gentrification in Bend over and over again. the lack of accessibility for students to walk to school, the pieces of how different housing looks. Even if you are a homeowner, how different a house looks from like the northwest part of town versus the southeast part of town. Will the people in the southeast be able to walk to a restaurant? And what type of restaurant are they going to be able to walk to? And you're talking about the health, like healthy eating choices, like it just kind of all kind of melds in together. And the reality is like money goes to certain parts of town. And so when you're talking about intersectionality, it's about dispersing that and about continuing to have those conversations. And sometimes those are difficult. And as Melanie said a little bit earlier, change is hard. The reality is when we make that change, we're increasing the health and vitality of the entire town. It's not just going to be that the Southeast will get more. It will be that the Southeast will then be on the same level as everyone else, and then they'll be able to reap those benefits, which is really amazing. And so continuing to have that intersectionality conversation, and historically, which we talked about on the affordable housing panel, is just really, I mean, there's a lot of racist, systemic racism that lives throughout our entire system. And so continuing to break those down, continuing to have those conversations, and environmental justice and racial justice intersect in so many different ways. You would have to give me many, many hours to continue to highlight all of those points, but really it's accessibility to resources, it's housing, it's food, it's safety, and we go on and on and on. So thank you.
Thank you, Rita. All right, Melanie, please.
So I think environmental justice is an important piece of any conversation about taking on the climate crisis. We know communities of color suffer disproportionately from environmentally caused health problems. We know that traditionally, as the environmental movement was born and has moved forward in this country, that Black, Indigenous people of color were not necessarily part of that movement or the face of that movement. I'm glad that some of these environmental organizations are now kind of recognizing that in this moment and trying to work to take on the cause of environmental justice alongside environmental conservation. But one example, that I can think of that how this intersects with what a city does and what goes on is that in this country, we have seen this time and time again that in our building out of infrastructure for cars, we have built highways through communities of color. We have erased Black neighborhoods to build a giant highway. We have built highways right next to where communities of color go to school. They're literally trying to expand I-5 in Portland right next to a historically Black attended school. And so this is still going on, and it's still really crucial that we keep this lens on our climate work so that when we come up with a project or an idea or something we think is going to work, we're not forgetting who it's going to be impacting and how, or when we're prioritizing where our resources are going and what we're tackling first, that we're recognizing the disproportionate impact that the climate crisis has on people in Bend. So I think it's really crucial, and I hope that our advisory committee is going to take this up as well. They should, and that we're going to have diverse voices on that committee to really make sure that we're putting this lens on all of our climate decisions.
Thank you, Melanie. Did I miss anybody on that question? Okay, thanks. All right, so we have another question coming in for you all. What do you say to those who argue that we're too small of an entity to make any noticeable dent in the problem? And Melanie, let's start with you for this question.
Sure, I think, again, it's kind of a, what's your messaging and how are you talking to people about doing their part? But I think that is going to require some leadership from our council and saying, look, here's the situation. Even if you just look at our country, we have had a real lack of any kind of meaningful action from the federal level on climate crisis. It just hasn't been there. We look at the state level, we've seen attempts to get through some changes, the Clean Energy Jobs Bill, and we've seen what the opposition did to make that fail and how hard there is pushback at that state level that hopefully we will overcome, at some point. But what can we do as someone who lives in Bend or someone who represents Bend to take this problem on, and we can still do things. We can still make a difference. It's hard for me to understand the mindset of someone saying, well, my actions don't matter. If I'm going to sit this one out, I'll let everyone else take it on. Because if everybody thinks that, nothing is going to get done. What we need is people to be motivated to say, I will do my part, and I will inspire everyone around me to do their part. And then look, we're all doing our part, and that's where the change happens. And I think that cities around the nation are catching on to this. Like I said, we have cities in Oregon that are taking on climate, and I think we need to join them. We need to join the movement, and we need to keep pushing so that people are inspired to join us and to move forward and to say, look, I can make a difference. When I recycle my food waste, when I choose a different mode of transportation, I'm adding to the pile that's going to make a difference, hopefully for our city, our state, our nation, and our world. We have to be leaders on this. We can't sit back and let someone else fix it. It's not going to happen.
All right, if that didn't inspire you to get up and do something, I don't know what will. Okay, thank you, Melanie. Let's hear from Anthony next.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, like all difficult questions, I think you can answer this one with the golden rule. It's you got to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and that's the categorical imperative that underlies all environmental reform and environmental activism. Everybody has to do their part, or nothing will get done. And I would also say that the premise of these boogeyman critics is true. One city cannot fix the climate crisis. The point is, every city must address the climate crisis. And that means that we as a city government must work with the county. We must work with the state. We must work with tribal governments. We must work with Bend Parks and Rec. We must work with every other government with whom we share an obligation to make sure that Bend is a sustainable city. And but the fact that we can't do it alone is not an argument to not do anything. That would result, I think, in not just doom for our city, but doom for our planet.
Thanks, Anthony. Megan, you are up next.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things here. One is, just like it's important to not only vote for president, but also vote for city council. It's important to know that, that many great movements and many great things start locally, and that it's a chain, reaction. And that, the city council needs to, lead, educate, set a vision. And, it's not an either or thing. It's not either like, okay, well, we do this locally or that's it. It's a both and thing, right? So, like Anthony said, we need to do our local part, but we also need to do our part as a state and as a country as well. A lot of times people, talk to me about, doing work on racism, right? And so where does it start? Where does it start? And I always say you start with yourself and you work on yourself. Then you work on your friends and your neighbors and your peer group, and then you go on from there, right? And I think it's important to know that small changes and decisions and become a chain reaction through the greater community, and that's, I think, what we sort of need to focus on in terms of communicating with the public about this.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, let's wrap this question up with Rita. And again, a reminder, if you have any other questions that you'd like to chat in, feel free to send them in via Facebook or here on the chat and Zoom.
Thanks, Lindsay. I thought you were going to forget me. I'm like waving. I just I challenged that question with like, what does impact really mean? I think that there are a lot of towns similar to our size that are really looking to us as leaders. I mean, Bend is growing so quickly. Many humans are like, oh my gosh, you live in Bend. Like, they want to know more about Bend. We have a lot of telecommuters moving here. So I think that we really have a platform right now to show, like, kind of show up in a different way. And I think that there are a lot of different entities looking at us. So I think that's kind of my first reaction to that question is like, what does impact really mean? I think it also looks at not only will as like kind of like a ripple effect, right? So like environmentally, we're going to change and be a leader, and then allowing that to kind of spread out. And also, if we are willing to kind of take the risks, learn new things and try things out, then we're also like giving other people the motivation and the access to the information of the things that we're already learning. And so I think that that's incredibly important, because sometimes it's just hard to take that first initial step. And so if we have the courage to take that first initial step, then maybe we are also showing others that they can have the courage to do that. And I think one kind of last piece is it really talks about what we've talked about during this forum is really a change in infrastructure. And if we're creating sustainability before buildings even in the planning process of buildings, I think that that can really create some change, and some of those risks that we kind of try out here in Bend can be things that can be more widespread as the increase in population continues to happen, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you all. That was really fun. I'm glad we got to see into your hearts a little bit and the inspirational piece there. I tell you what, you all give a really good pep talk. Okay, so for our last question, let's see, how can we engage? And we've touched on this a little bit, and I know Anthony touched on this a little in the last question, but how can we engage other governmental and non-governmental organizations in implementing this plan? Rita, let's start with you for this one.
Well, Lindsay, there are just so many cool organizations here in Bend that really have kind of their niche, right? We have Environmental Center, we have Commute Options, we have ONDA, we have, I could go on a many lists. We have Land Watch, we have the conservation, like there's just so many different groups. And so it just shows that our town is super motivated. And so having a conversation with all of those groups allows us to kind of partner and get expertise from all of those places. So we don't have to create the wheel. The wheel is just like a little bit spread out right now. And so it would be really cool. And like, I think that this could be an amazing strategy by taking individuals from those organizations and kind of bringing them all into the room together and allowing them to have kind of a structured intersectional conversation about ways that we can kind of work together and maybe like, you know, take care of like multiple issues through having those conversations, and that they have, I'm trying to like find the right words for it, but I mean, something that I've kind of experienced here in Bend is that there's the same conversation is having in many different groups, and the groups aren't just talking with one another. And so how do we kind of bring those groups together and have those conversations?
Thanks, Rita. Megan.
Yeah, I mean, I would really be interested as well in how can we bring in you know, groups that, you know, have even opposed some parts of this plan before, right? How can we bring in the realtors and the builders? How can we bring in you know, the chamber, you know, Parks and Rec? How can we bring in the schools? How can we bring in the neighborhood associations? You know, I think that the key to success are these partnerships. And you know, some sort of similar to this like pandemic, you know, motto of like, we're all in this together. I think that's the, you know, the vision that we have to set is that we really are all in this together. We are all under the same climate system here. And you know, we all need to work together, you know, to do this. And for some of these groups that are, you know, more sort of economically focus on the economic benefits of you know, making a difference, you know, in our climate, you know, sustainable building and, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, really set, and the employment opportunities, you know, from some of these new businesses that may, you know, come out because of our actions on this. So I think that is the absolute most important part of the success of this plan. And it would require a lot of work, and it's going to require a lot of leadership.
Thank you, Megan. All right, Anthony, let's hear from you next, please.
Well, I think I'll just speak practically. I mean, one, we need to make sure that Phil Chang gets elected to the county commission. We need to work hard to make sure that people who are representing us at every level of government view the environment as an important resource with which we have the responsibility to be stewards. And then I think it comes down to real practical issues of shared concern. We have a landfill that is, it's going to fill up. And I'm not willing as a citizen of this city to ship my trash to another location. And I'm not willing to have that climate cost, that blood on my hands. So I think it comes down to specific issues of mutual concern, energy development projects that affect tribal governments, the state, and other counties, I think are opportunities, right? These are opportunities to work with other governments. So I think that I agree with Rita. We have the opportunity to really lead, not just as individuals for folks who are in government, but we have the opportunity to lead as a city because I think that's what's going to take in our region. And when we're working with other governments, we need to make sure that they see us that way, that they see us as a leader, they see us as a government that can provide solutions that work for their communities also.
All right, thank you, Anthony. Melanie.
So, I would expect the city council to be collaborating and, working closely with all the other governmental entities that are in Bend, the county level, parks, even libraries, all the other districts that are here. And folks have touched on a lot of the points that I would mention, talking about, common goals and the needs that intersect for all of us when thinking about the future of Bend, and how climate change is going to be affecting that. Just thinking about how events of the past couple of days affect all different sectors of our city and trying to bring those sectors together and talk about, how this is going to affect our economy and what the solutions will do to bolster our economy and make us a more sustainable city in the long run. And I think, there are points to be made outside just the moral imperative of preserving the planet for our kids and for future generations. There are points to be made about how this can make Bend a stronger city, how this can bring jobs here and prosperity to our community, how this can promote racial justice and equity in our city through this climate action that we can take. So I think that if we try to bring people in that way, both all of our great nonprofits and other entities we have, plus our partner government organizations, I think that we can really get engaged on how we tackle this, again, as a group, moving together to really take on the climate crisis.
Thanks, Melanie. All right. So we have, I think we're going to need to open this up for a few more hours with some of these questions that came in from Ariel, but I'm excited to be able to have a conversation around this or dig in a little bit deeper. So how do you compare the urgency of climate change to the urgency of addressing systemic racism? And along those lines, what do you say to people who are skeptical of either of those needs? Megan, let's get started with you.
Oh boy. Well, again, I don't think it's an either or thing, right? I don't think that it's either we have systemic racism or we have, climate change. It's both. We have systemic racism. We have systemic racism in Bend, and we also have a climate crisis, and we have a climate crisis in Bend. And so I don't think there's really, a comparison in terms of urgency. They are both happening now. They are both affecting, many people in our population, and they're we can think about both and care about both equally, and at the same time, and it's possible to do. We just need people in office that understand that we are in a climate crisis and that we have systemic racism. And that's pretty much all I'm saying about that.
Thank you, Megan. All right, Melanie.
Yeah, Megan put it well. It's not either or, and I think that's the real crux of intersectionality, is that you have one and then you have the other, and it compounds the effects that people suffer. Like I said, we know that communities of color disproportionately suffer from environmental health problems. So that's that crossing over together, and you cannot separate the two. So, I mean, a little bit academically, the way I would think about it is that systemic racism is something that our country was founded on. It's baked into our systems in this country, and we are in a struggle right now to figure out how to get it out. But it's been there. People have been experiencing systemic racism since the birth of this nation and before, obviously. And then climate change is something that humans have created, right? The crisis that we're in is human created. And so it might be easier for some reason for people to see how that we could pull that back by human action as well. And there has been an environmental movement in this country that has come up with things like bottle bills and the EPA and regulations. There's been action on that. There's not been that same sort of action, I think, on really tackling systemic racism. But again, they're intertwined. And so I think moving forward on either of the problems, you have to discuss the other. And that's how they're connected. I don't know really what to say to people that don't think either of these things are a problem. I think the events of this year have shown that they both absolutely are a crisis for this nation right now. So all I will say is that if you elect this group of 4 to your city council, you will have 4 people that I know believe that climate change is real and that we can do something about it as humans on this planet.
Thank you, Melanie. Anthony.
Yeah, I'm really glad I'm very proud that our city is instituting the Human Rights and Equity Commission along with the Climate Committee. I think this moment is very important and very telling that both of those bodies are being contemplated and formed, and they are critical to the survival of our democracy, our country. They are critical to the sustainability of our city from an environmental perspective. They are both critical to the sustainability of our city from an economic perspective. And of course, in addition to being the right thing to do. So I'm really proud of where we are and where we're headed. And I think obviously we can do much better.
Thank you, Anthony. Let's wrap this one up with Rita.
Yes, just the easy question I see at the end. I just think that it's a pretty interesting perspective when we have that conversation about urgency, because as Megan and Melanie spoke about that intersectionality piece, I mean, there is such a huge environmental justice piece about breaking down systemic racism, because we look at gentrification, we look at safety in housing, we think about safety on the roads. I mean, all of those pieces are just as much an environmental justice as they are racial justice. And so my hope is that 2 and 2 would go together. The other piece is like to truly get to a place of us breaking down systemic racism would mean that we would have to have an environmental conscious conversation also, because that accessibility piece just really wouldn't happen if we didn't have that conversation. That urgency, I think, urgency is such an interesting term because it's that push, right? That excitement. And I think that as humans, we get kind of lost in that. And so, I mean, I've said it in my answers before, but continuing to have the conversation and continuing to look at mostly youth leaders who are who are environmental justice warriors. I mean, we see them in documentaries. A couple of them have come and spoken at spoken in Bend, and they continue to do the work. And it's not something that I've seen in person, but it's definitely stuff that I've seen in videos and really hearing about it through the internet. So maybe part of that urgency piece is bringing some of those conversations in person to Bend. When I have conversations with people who are skeptical of either of those needs, I have pretty honest conversations about my personal experiences. I mean, what I've experienced here, not only as a queer person of color, but also the accessibility of wanting to be more environmentally conscious and not having the resources to do it. So not having the resources to have an electric vehicle, not having the resources to rent or own a home that is environmentally conscious, and not being able to have access to a lot of those resources that if I did have access to those resources, of course I would get them. And so really it's about breaking down the barriers. And not only are you breaking down the barriers for BIPOC community members, but you're also breaking down the barriers for all humans to be able to live environmentally conscious lives. And that needs to change from a systemic perspective.
Thank you, Rita. All right, thank you all for your responses here tonight. It was really great to get some insight on how you view these really important issues in our community. And as a private citizen, I'm excited to see a council who is looking to move a lot of these initiatives forward. And as an environmental center employee, I look forward to working with our entire council, whoever that may be, in the next year to continue to move these initiatives forward. Thank you all for your good insight into these. So we will wrap up now with your closing statements, and then I'll pass it over to Sid to wrap up the session. All right, so let's start with Rita for the closing.
Thank you all for the time today. Thank you all for the intriguing and kind of thought-provoking questions. You know, as a candidate, we have a lot of conversations about a lot of different subjects, and I think it's incredibly important that subjects, especially like environmental justice, are brought to the forefront, because if we're not having these forums and we're not having conversations with Lindsey and other environmental leaders, then we won't. And so continuing to have that push and really increasing our knowledge as we move towards Election Day. I'm just super appreciative of the forum and about the other candidates that are on here. I really feel strongly that this slate is extremely motivated in environmental justice and about breaking down a lot of those barriers, and I am really excited to be here.
Thank you, Rita. Let's hear from Melanie next.
Yeah, thanks Indivisible Ben and Vocal Seniority, and thanks Lindsey for moderating for us and the great questions tonight. I love having these conversations and hearing from everyone about looking forward on what we can do here in Bend. And I believe that Bend should take on the climate crisis. I think it's imperative to our well-being as a city and our future as a city. And so that's what I want to do on our council, and I want to do it with these folks on this forum here. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Oregon League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club. I'm proud to get the support of these organizations that know that we have to do something now, and we have to do it at every level. And if other levels won't do it, we're going to do it at the local level, and we're going to lead on this and become a leader in the fight on climate change. So I, again, really thank you everybody for being here tonight and the opportunity to talk about this. And folks, if folks have any follow-up questions for me, hit me up on my Facebook page or on Twitter, or melanieforbend@gmail.com, and I'm happy to talk through any other climate questions and ideas. I know our community wants us to move on this, and I think that hopefully we will be doing that very soon.
Thank you, Melanie. All right, let's hear from Anthony.
Thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, Indivisible, and thank you, Vocal Seniority, and thank you, Rita and Melanie and Megan. Every time I have the opportunity to speak with you, I learn more, and my thinking, I hope it's evolving. I really enjoy listening and hearing and learning from you. You know, this is the existential crisis of our time. And I know, you know, I sort of dislike it when public servants say, well, as a father or as a wife or, you know, as a son or as a daughter, but I can't separate my feelings about this topic from my kids. And this is really personal to me that, yeah, one person isn't going to make a difference, but we sure as heck better all put our heads together and attack the climate crisis, because if we don't, my kids are going to suffer, our kids are going to suffer, our friends' kids are going to suffer. We have a responsibility to the next 7 generations. And if we are not treating the climate crisis as the existential crisis of our time as a country and as a state and as a city, we're not doing right by the next 7 generations. I've been really fortunate to, you know, fight some of these cases that are matters of tribal sovereignty and economic justice, you know, through the district court level and the appellate court level in our region. And, you know, these aren't my victories by any means. These aren't my fights by any means. I'm just serving my clients. I can't take credit for the victories and the protections they've won on behalf of their people, federally recognized Indian tribes and tribal peoples. But I certainly have it in my head that that's what's at stake, and that the future of our region is worth fighting for. And sometimes it does require a fight. So again, I'm really grateful to everybody. And if you want to learn more about any of the things that I care about deeply for our city, you can check out the website, broadmanforbend.com, or call me anytime, 639-4600, or shoot me an email. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. And let's wrap up with Megan with her closing statements.
All right, well, just thank you, Vocal Seniority. Thank you, Indivisible Bend. Thank you, Lindsey, for tonight. I always learn so much at these forums. And the other thing I really like about them is, you know, it's a chance for you know, all of us to share ideas. And I think that's something that we're going to do so well when we're on city council together. The other thing is, yeah, Anthony, it is super cheesy to say it, but it's true. I mean, I'm doing this for my kids, and I have this picture. This is my kids in the Oregon coast right now, and it looks like they're on Mars. So this is why we need to be talking about, you know, about this issue. It is because of the next generation that, you know, desperately needs us to fix this mess that we had a big hand in creating.
All right, and I believe the Vocal Seniority was going to wrap up. So correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's right. Okay. First of all, thank you, Lindsey, for moderating this, and to all the candidates for you know, giving us your time and your thoughts. I also continue to learn so much from these forums, and just thrilled that folks keep coming back for these things. They're quite important. In that vein, there is another one scheduled for Monday, September 21st, to talk about the city's role in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. And our subject matter expert for that one is going to be Dr. Amber Kaiser. And so we hope to see some of you there. I just want to say hello also to people that are watching on Facebook Live, and to let folks know that this has been recorded, and sometime, maybe late tonight, it will be, the recording will be available for viewing on the Vocal Seniority's YouTube channel. So I just, again, want to thank you all for doing this. And one last thing, if any of you who are listening are as excited about these 4 candidates as I am, then do something about that too. You can go to their websites, their Facebook pages, you can donate, you can volunteer. We need these folks on our city council. So here's another way in which you can do your part in helping Bend be the city it needs to be. And with that, I will end this session. And again, thank you all for being here.